So now that we have our basic functions set up for extracting the data from a single website, we want to figure out how to automate this process for every website that contains these listings. So this is the first page and it has 30 listings, but you can see that there's a total of 761 listings and there's basically looks like 26 pages of these listings. So we want some way to figure out not only how to go through all these 26 pages, but also to find out how many pages there are so we can tell our code automatically how many times to go through these pages. The first thing we're going to do is basically go to some of these pages and try to figure out a structure for how these addresses work so we can call these pages sequentially. So if we go to the second page, you can see this is the address and it has a 30 in here. If you go to the third one, you can see it's the same exact address, but it's a 60. So we can verify this to make sure, but you can see that there's a repeating pattern, that every time there's a next page, it'll basically be the same HTML, but it'll put in the next 30 numbers in here. So this works differently for different pages. This is the way that TripAdvisor works, but typically in any page, you can find some kind of structure that you can use to loop through a number of pages. So what we want to do now is basically when we call our data, instead of just typing in one address, we want to try to represent this structure in how we call the URLs. So what I'm going to do is create two variables. The first variable will be called base URL, so this will be the first part of the URL that we want. And then I'm going to make one called city URL, which is the second part after this part that changes. Okay? And then between here, I'll insert an incrementing number to represent each succeeding page. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is figure out how many pages there are in total. So I need a way to figure out this number 26, because if I want to do different cities or different attraction types, this number is always going to change. And I can use the same methods that I was using from before to actually find out where in the code this 26 exists. So if I highlight it, go to inspect element, you can see this is the structure here. It's a little bit complicated because it has all this JavaScript written into it, but I can see that all of these links on the bottom of the page exist within this div tag with the ID pager bottom and class PG links, and there's just a series of links, and the link I want is the second from the last. So I can use that information to write it into my Python code so it can get that number 26. And to do that, I'll basically get the URL. So here our URL should be the same from before, so I'll comment on that. So what this will do is it'll go to the first page of the New York City attractions page. It'll get the HTML from that page, and I'll use Beautiful Soup to parse that page, and I'll make a new variable to store the number of pages, and I'll do soup find all, and this is basically the same idea as before. I'm just going to change some things to find the actual structure I want. So I'll get all of the information within the PG links div. I'll get the first element, and then I'll use find all to find all the A tags, and I want the second from the last. So in Python I could do -2 and it'll count backwards through the list. And from there, I get the string within that tag, and I strip that string of spaces. And the final thing I'll do is I'll just convert that to an integer, because right now it's a string, and in order to work with it in a loop, I need an integer. So I'll convert that to an integer. So now, if I run this, it'll take a while to get the page and download it, but now if I ask for num page, it'll give me 26. So once I have this num page variable, I can set up a loop to loop through all of the pages in the New York City attractions database. So the first thing I'll do is I'll specify a starting variable that will count this actual incrementer by 30. So page num will start at 0, and then I can do for k in range. This is similar to that basic loop we looked at in the first few lectures. For k in range num page. Okay, so now this loop will happen num page times, and each time k will take on that value. So within this loop, we're gonna sort of create the URL that we want at that time, and that URL will be a combination of the base URL plus, if we go back here, there's this little OA in front of the number, so we'll add that, plus we want the number of this page, so that will be stored in our page num variable. This will start at 0 and go by 30 each time, and at the end we'll add in our city URL string. And at the end of this loop, we're basically going to increment this page num variable, which is adding to our URL string, by 30. And we'll use the plus equals notation for that. And in here, once we have our URL, we're going to do the same thing as before and call this fetch items function to get all the information from that page. And then we pass it the URL that we want. So before we run this, something that's really important is you need to put in some kind of delay when you start to automate these processes. And this is crucial because typically a website server is not accustomed to having very fast downloads from its websites. So it's pretty much tuned to what a normal user, how a normal user would use the website. So say you're looking at this website, you might click around and you might go to the next page, possibly once per second, but not any faster than that. And if you start to do these loops where you're going through a many number of pages and getting all this information, you can crash the server, and it's very likely if you crash their server, then they'll actually ban your IP address. So what we want to do is we want to start putting in delays in strategic moments of the script so that it doesn't overload the other server. And this is important because what we're doing is not really supported by the website. It's not an actual API. We're basically trying to mimic how a normal user would get information from a website, but just to automate it. So in order to put in these pauses, we're going to use a time library of Python that can delay our code for a specific amount of time. So in order to do this, we need to import the time library into Python, and then we need to put in a delay within some piece of our code that'll delay at the right moment. And I'm going to do this within our fetch items code, that after it gets all the listings at the very end, it's going to pause for 1 second. So to do that, we say time.sleep and we do 1. And here I'll just write a little note to myself so I know what it's doing. Okay, so this now, every time we call fetch items, at the very end, once it's done with all listings, it's going to wait 1 second before it goes through this loop again. Again, that's very important because if you start doing this at the speed of the script, it's just going to overload the server. So now we can run this script. And you can see that it's going through page by page to each of the listing pages and getting all the listings from that page, and at the end it's waiting for a second. And I can't stress it enough, the importance of waiting between your calls, just to make sure that you don't overload the page and your IP address doesn't get banned from that page.